Welcome everyone to our special edition. This is a United Nations Association of Australia's webinar on unpacking the alignment of the SDGs and Australian political policies. As always, we begin by acknowledging the traditional owners wherever we are listening to this webinar this evening. I'm in Mianjan, Brisbane, with the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I know that you across the country are sharing with each other the traditional lands on which you are living this evening. So with that, we go straight into the seminar. I'll call on Rod Welford, whose dulcet tones you've already heard, who'll introduce Rob and get the session started. Rod.
Thanks, Claire, and welcome everyone. It's great to have so many people online with us. There's something like 30 people at the moment, so that's a wonderful roll up. And welcome to everyone from all of the states, South Australia, New South Wales, Queensland and elsewhere. I can see there are people from all over the country, and that's really great to have you on board. As Claire said, this is a special webinar that we've brought on for you at relatively short notice, but that's partly a function of the timing of the preparation of this special report by my colleague from Griffith University, Dr. Rob Hales. Let me introduce Rob. He's a senior lecturer in the Department of Business Strategy and Innovation in the Griffith Business School. He's director of the Griffith Centre for Sustainable Enterprise in the school, and that centre oversees the sustainability strategy and initiatives of the Griffith Business School. He's also co-chair of Griffith University's SDG working group, which oversees the SDG strategy and Times higher education impact ranking processes of the university. His research interests focus on the governance issues around the grand challenges of our time. In particular, his research focuses on SDGs, of course, particularly in business and government. He looks at issues around the business case for responding to climate change policy, carbon management, sustainable tourism, and of course, working with our First Peoples on consent processes in relation to climate change and other sustainable development goal matters. He's completed many research consultancies for business and government throughout Australia over the recent years, and obviously they're all in this research area. At the last election, he prepared a similar report that mapped the SDGs to the policy announcements of each of the major parties contesting the federal election, and he indicated to me a little while back that he planned to undertake that exercise again. It's been quite a lengthy process because there have been many policies issued, and of course mapping them to all of the SDGs and seeing which of the SDGs are in fact ventilated in the policies has been a lot of work, but we're very grateful to Rob that he's been able to do that work for us and be able to be available tonight to present to us. So Rob, we'd like to welcome you to the UNAA and invite you to present to us on your report.
Thanks very much, Rod, for the introduction. Very generous, and it's great to be here. I've heard many great things about the United Nations Association in Queensland and also Australia for many years, so it's a real honour to be able to present some information about party election policies and how they line up with the Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, and I did this with some help of some research assistants 3 years ago in 2019, and that report, very short report, and also a press release was put out back then, and you can probably Google that right now if you want to have a look at that. Sarah has kindly emailed me just now to be able to, I think she may be able to share the presentation with me. With us all, I should say. So I've just sent that, and hopefully we can get that up. And this time around, oh great, here we go. That makes it much better. So I decided to do this again so that we could have a little bit of a record of what has happened over the years And again, on 3 years' time, I'll do the analysis again. My aim is to publish this in a peer-reviewed journal. At the moment, it's a report, so there's a little bit of back-end work still to be done to be able to get it into peer-reviewed level, but it's quite worthy of public dissemination because it shows us at a snapshot level how the political parties are addressing the sustainable development issues. And I've even done a comparison between last time and this time, so we can see a bit of a shift, which is very interesting, particularly for the government who's in power at the moment, because there has been considerable critique from social and environmental dimensions on their performance over the last 3 years. And in response to that, the political parties have put out a policy response to counter or develop or build on those election policies and also the record of government. So I thought we might just kick it off and have a look at it and show you the approach and some of the findings. And really, it's a chance to be able to go into a Q&A afterwards. So I'll talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then go into a bit of a Q&A to talk about sustainable development and policies of political parties. If we could go to the next slide there, thanks. Yeah, so I'm sure many people in the audience from United Nations Association are quite aware of our ranking on the SDG index. It's not as high as one would have hoped or expected for OECD country. So we've gradually crept up a couple of places in the last few years. We used to be down around 37, 38 and progressively getting better, but not in a rapid way. This indicates that there is much work to do in Australia. Indeed, other universities, in particular Monash, colleagues down there do a great job of actually analysing priorities for Australia as well. So they have a number of reports there if you want to dig further into this that can shine a bit of a light on policy imperatives and initiatives that are needed to improve our ranking. Thanks. Let's go to the next one. So as part of that ranking, the index, the SDG index, you can Google it to use Adam Bant's famous words. I'll pull that excuse out if anyone asks me any difficult questions as I'm trying to remember any numbers. The SDG index has a lot of rankings of the countries, and it looks at priority areas. And you can see there for Australia, which ones we're doing well at, which ones we're slightly increasing, which are the challenging ones, and which are the ones we're really failing at, which are the red ones. So it's no surprise anyone following policy, energy policy, for example, with number 7, that we don't score very well, and we're not improving very much on standards there. Next slide, thanks. So to do this work, it means looking through 169 targets and trying to find elements and statements of policies that align or hit one of the 169 targets of the 17 SDGs. So the way in which that was done is through keyword searches and line by line thinking where each policy should align or should go in terms of the SDG target. And for anyone who's looked at these targets, a lot of the targets actually relate to developing countries. So there's a number of targets that were not used in the analysis. So if we go to the next slide, I think we're on to methods, if I remember correctly. Oh no, go straight into 2019, I apologise. So the ranking last time shows a indication that obviously the party about sustainable development, which is the Green, scores very well. But when I did the analysis, I was quite surprised that quite often the policy of the Labor Party was actually quite well aligned to a lot of the SDGs, and in particular the targets in there. Also, you can see that there was alignment with much of the targets from the Liberal Party, and you can see less going down. Now, this time, because of resource constraints, I only had a look at the Greens, the Labor Party, and the Liberal Party for 2020. And in particular, I think it's worth going into the methods. I think we've got methods coming up fairly soon. I don't have preview, apologies for that. So just to give a rating to see how well each party was traveling, this rating system was used. So significant evidence infers strong alignment between policy and SDG. So they're talking about the topic and they've got some detail there. Like I said at the beginning, I didn't actually analyse to see whether that policy would deliver a great outcome, so therefore would achieve. So the aim here is just to see the snapshot approach to see whether a party is thinking about this as a priority for Australia, and you go down the scale there. So 0 is no mention of any element of the SDG, and a negative, which I didn't really use this time round in the 2022 analysis because I didn't do parties like One Nation. One Nation in their policy platforms actively opposed the United Nations and therefore not particularly interested in sustainable development goals. Okay, so let's go on to some of these. If we go to the next slide, thanks. Okay, so the policies, there's much talk, if you've been following the news, much talk about the different parties and their policy platforms. Last time in 2019, it's fair to say that Labor went in with a very large policy platform, and this time around pared that policy platform down. That's what there was said in the media. But when I dove into those policies, I thought, this is going to be a quick job because I've been told by the media that there's not much of a policy platform, but in fact, there was a considerable amount, and if not almost the same amount of policies that I had to review this time around. I think the key thing, there were some policies that they left out, and I'll get onto that in a minute. So the other thing I also did is, or I will do and put in the report, having completed the analysis, is doing a Leximancer, which is a word association and word count, which gives a great graphic output of what the policies are trying to achieve and identifying the key themes. So that'll also be in the report, should be out tomorrow. Okay, can we go to the next one? And it's interesting, even if we just go to the next slide as well, it's not really for everyone to see, to go into each one of those. Everyone can go into their own time and can Google it. But just to put up some of the themes you can identify just by looking at the policies, platforms, and the headings here. We go to the next one. Again, we'll just go through them all. You can see that there is quite an extensive range here. Now, this is actually the complete list. The other slide was didn't have the complete list, so we've got a large number of slides. If we go through the next one, just to show the next Green Party election forward. Thanks. You can see there's quite a significant number, and we'll stop there. Thank you. Okay, so significant number of policies to go through, significant number of targets. So I'll just jump straight into the analysis now. You can see here that there's a rating. The rating relates to the colour. Just added so for accessibility, so all people can see it. And you can also see there's another number in there with a -1, and that indicates a change from the previous election. So and the judgments made here to say whether it's gone down or up is based on the number of policies that align with the targets in that particular SDG. And it's very interesting. I was a little bit surprised that the Labor Party dropped there, given the social leanings of the Labor Party. But I do think this is in relation to not wanting to follow the Liberal Party in some of their minimum wage election policies. I think I'm trying to explain now why there was a bit of a gap there, and this is worthy of a discussion, I think. But yes, there's a little bit of a drop there. There was an increase in the Green Party, mostly because of a more advanced sustainable agriculture policy that was brought in there. And it's surprising that the Liberal Party didn't do too well there, because you've got the Nationals in there as well with their policies. They only scored a 1 because they did have a lot of cash splash towards agriculture in the regions, but it couldn't be deemed under the targets to be sustainable, so therefore they didn't score highly on that area. Which I was looking to see if there were any sustainability leanings in those policies, and there weren't. Now, goal number 3 is not a high priority area in terms of the SDG index. If you remember the previous slide, it was a dark green one because we're doing really well in that. Great health system here, despite lots of noise about how it can be better. And I would agree with lots of the opinions about how it could be better. But essentially, we do have good policies throughout all of the parties that hit the targets. Doesn't mean to say we can't improve, though, and not have good debate about how we can improve. And the reason why, going on to goal number 4, the reason why the Liberal Party didn't score as high here is mainly because of the funding, lack of funding towards and lack of initiatives and overall policies in the education targets. There's a lot of focus on training in the TAFE sector, in the vocational sector, and there were mentions about standards. There's argument about, what type of standards in, for example, history is one of the hot topics at the moment, should be taught, but that doesn't really hit one of the targets. So therefore, they don't score very well there. Gender equality and empowering all women. There's been some recent announcements by the government, but they tend to be targeted to 1 or 2 areas, and it didn't hit the broad range of targets that are necessary to lift gender equality and empowerment in a more holistic framework, and therefore only scored 2 there. All right, and hopefully people can see the next one, goal number 6, the ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, some sustainable management policies for water in the Labor and Greens, but again, although there were some mention of water initiatives, the idea of sustainability was not in any of the policies, particularly related to the targets there. So that's goal number 6. So you can see a bit of a pattern here, that the alignment really comes down to specific targets and having a central platform of economic development without thinking about what type of economic development means that the scoring of those policies is not going to be high, which reflects a lack of breadth across the SDG targets. Okay, so that's a bit of a conclusion so far, going through up to goal 6. If we go through to the next one, thanks. The energy debate rages. It's interesting that climate change pops its head up in the election debates, but goes back down. The energy debate is probably, I don't know whether I'm correct in saying this and whether I've followed it and done any media analysis, but it seems like the energy debate is more dominant than the debate around climate at the moment. But irrespective of that, I think in terms of the analysis that we did here, that the energy policies of the Liberal Party, I was hoping to see that some of these newer policies coming through might have gone across the breadth of the targets, but they didn't. And a lot of the initiatives couldn't be counted as renewable because you couldn't count, well, number one, you couldn't count technologies that weren't proven, like carbon capture and storage, really, for trying to achieve affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. And the other one was that other reason why there was also inclusion of gas as a carbon emitting energy source, and that really doesn't fit into those goals there. So it didn't score terribly well there. The other parties, Labor and Greens, have a very well-defined policy on energy in terms of the targets. I'm not saying that they can't do better. Goal 8, inclusive sustainable economic growth. Interesting that the Greens here only scored a 2 because I think the policy suite that they have is not looking at the macroeconomy in particular and focused on renewables, environmental areas to facilitate growth. So I think that's where, if there's a lacking there in goal number 8, that's where it goes for the Greens. In terms of Liberal Party, I think the sustainable, the word sustainable is just not there as it should be. And the inclusivity is not there either in terms of decent work for all. There's plenty of facilitation of economic growth through a number of activities, but it really didn't have that inclusivity and sustainable approach. Number 9, building resilient infrastructure. There was a bit of a renewed focus on cities in here. There's some interesting policies related to cities, but the Liberal Party went down here because of not attending to the notion of sustainable. A lot of focus on roads in particular, which might be sustainable if it was. Well, this is not part of the analysis, but it would be sustainable if it was matched with, policies, progressive policies on electric cars and a sustainable green resources policy as well, to be able to make sure that we have sustainability in that side of things as well. Reduced inequality within and among countries. The Liberal Party went down mainly because of just a lack of the economic policies to be inclusive. And that also includes some overseas development assistance as well, which there was a lack of those policies, whereas there were more overseas development assistance with the other two parties. Making cities safe and human settlements inclusive. There's a number of policies. ranked pretty highly. 2 is not a bad score for the Liberal Party there, but the other 2 parties definitely have the more sustainable aspects of making cities safe. Although I do have to say, outside of the targets, I thought a lot of the policies in the Liberal Party went a long way in terms of thinking about safety in cities as well, and some of their initiatives for funding based on trying to increase safety in cities. It wasn't, the typical thing is aiming for crime reduction in policies, typically by the Liberal Party, but I did think there was some extra ones coming in there, which is very interesting, but outside the scope of the targets. Sustainable consumption and production. Interesting that the Greens this time around have much stronger circular economy policies. So they've actually strengthened, even though they've actually just got a 3 there. And there's some very interesting policies coming through the Labor Party as well, reflecting changes in sustainable production, and their reconstruction fund as well focuses on that as well. And the sustainable consumption and production patterns, that includes waste, and there was a lack of policies hitting those targets from the Liberal Party. Urgent action on climate change. Just today, I looked at the Climate Council's analysis of the parties, and they give an excellent rundown of how the policies fare from the different political parties. But in terms of climate action, I was hoping that a lot of the cash splash by the Liberal Party would bring itself up a little bit more, but it didn't really, in terms of hitting the range of targets that are necessary. Simply throwing money at particular initiatives won't bring up a score in that area, and that's that seems to be a theme. Before we go off this slide here, that seems to be a bit of a theme. I know that that's been a critique from some of the other parties about it, but I was surprised to see the amount of money being included in the policies for particular initiatives, whereas it would seem that the other 2 parties didn't. They also had cash splashes, but they also had frameworks and plans and strategies that went a long way to try and broaden the effect of the initiative as well. So that's something I noticed in the analysis here. Having said that, I did see, and in terms of macroeconomic growth and macroeconomic policies, I think the Liberal Party shows a lot more depth of understanding compared to the Greens, and that seemed to be something that came out in the policies, and that was just a general comment about it, about the analysis. Okay, so we go to goal 14, thanks. And we go to conserve sustainable use of oceans. It's really the other, to get a bit more flavour, and just talking about the analysis, to get a bit more flavour about what's happened when I looked at these policies. It was really interesting to see the battles between the parties coming out. For example, the Labor Party and the Liberal Party at loggerheads over the role of marine parks and how many parks there should be, closure of parks, the role of recreational fishing and facilitating fishing. So there's definitely different lines drawn in the sand about how to conserve the oceans, even though their score are 2. So there's big differences in how that happens. I haven't got a number there in 3, sorry. Yeah, so, but the Greens do have a lot of sustainability policies that cover across those targets. And the same thing goes for goal number 15. Anyone following the forest debate will know that 2 Labor parties are phasing out logging of native forests. And that's the Victorian one, which is, I think, 2030, and very soon, in a few years' time, over in Western Australia. So the policies that the Liberal Party have are saying that it's a sustainable forest approach, but doesn't really hit the targets. But their focus has been on forest productivity, which therefore does get a score because it's about employment and inclusion of people in the forestry activities. So they don't get a 0; they get a 1 because they're interested in that, and they're wanting to stop the trend towards plantation. I think we've got about 87% of all timber that is produced, it comes from plantations now, and the percentage of native forests in timber production is decreasing. So that's the trend, but there's still a fair bit of energy, money, and policies from the Liberal Party trying to direct it that way, whereas the Labor and the Greens are very much in favour of trying to move towards that plantation side of things. The last 2 goals, sort of similar in a way, but because of the I have to say the lack of focus on accountability meant that the Liberal Party actually went backwards this time round, and I had to be very careful about biases here. I mean, I'm a person that thinks that government should be accountable and believes in corruption commissions, even though they may have some faults. A corruption commission is probably better than none. So that's my personal bias, but I had to be careful not to put that bias in terms of the ratings, because some of the ratings don't actually reflect some the arguments about a particular policy platform or policy initiative. So even despite that, I think that's fair to say that it's in that area that there's a decrease there for the Liberal Party. The strengthening implementation, revitalisation of global partnerships, sustainable development, stable from previous years. Greens get 3 because they support the United Nations imperative of 0.7%, 0.7% of gross national income directed towards aid. And interestingly, Labor didn't have that in their policies. And correct me if I'm wrong, it may already be there as a previous policy, but it wasn't in the election commitments. But I don't think it is. Someone might actually want to correct me there. But yeah, and some of the goals there in terms of sustainable development are there, but not the full overseas development assistance that's needed. So there was because of the increase of election commitments in terms of money for the South Pacific, not just the step up that was previously committed, but new commitments. There is movement in that direction from the Liberal Party. All right, now I do have a few other slides, but they're sort of background slides talking about particular inclusive growth or gross national income and overseas development assistance. But I was thinking we may even stop there and open it up for questions. I see there's 28 chats there, and we have 30 participants in the room. So I wasn't following the chat there, so I might go through and have a look at some of the chat may be very interesting to open it up for discussion.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Rob. That's an amazing amount of work for you to be sharing with us in a very short period of time. I think just observing the fact that you've looked across 3 parties, the volume of policy work that you've had a look at, and the level of detail in your methodology. And then to be able to see each of those 3 parties ranked across each goal, including the shift from last year, is an incredibly rich data set for us to be dealing with. I want to encourage people to use the chat to put their questions in, and I'll pick those up and pass them on to you, Rob, or to other members of our panel, if that's the right thing to do. But I thought I might just kick off with a question to take us up from all that detail and ask you, from a helicopter view, how do you see that the situation has shifted from 2019? And what do you think the drivers for that might be?
Well, I think maybe if I could joke, the bulldozer approach of Scott Morrison may have been what's needed in the pandemic. Just thinking from a leadership point of view, even though taking the jokes aside now, from a leadership perspective in those situations, the command and control, more, I wouldn't say dictatorial, but that's what they say in the theory, more direct approach to leadership is definitely something that's needed there. I think the philosophical shift that the Liberal Party had in the pandemic, and also the comment by John Howard at the beginning of the pandemic, talking about, all philosophical bets are off in relation to the intervention, the Keynesian intervention of Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg, which had an enormous effect, a positive effect. Yeah. So, and I think that action, even though we can say, that there shouldn't have been that waste to the corporations through JobKeeper, for example, that action shows the effect of inclusion on economics, on macroeconomics. Mm. And I think that, and people got that too, just the average person out there got that, that we do need to have people in having some income to be able to be functioning in society. And that has a big effect on our macroeconomics. And I think that's a pretty fundamental shift for Australia's thinking. It's interesting that welfare is seen here. I noticed a couple of times during this election, welfare is seen as a really dirty word. But in other countries, welfare is seen as is not a dirty word in their language. It's actually something that means that they're collectively looking after each other, and that we have responsibility for each other. And that's a big difference to what we have now. So I think the shift with the pandemic might have a large effect. However, as a result of that, growing inequalities, as a result of the pandemic, which we have seen, I think that is now challenging our system. And I think that is really challenging. And I think that the Liberal Party is going through some challenges internally now as a result of those philosophical shifts in relation to how they position their philosophy in relation to what's happening in society in relation to inequality. So I think that's a very good question. And I think there's some challenging times. It's not just about, because independents are challenging the Liberals and the political system through climate change. I think there's some bigger narratives here, I think, Susan, that your question speaks to.
Thank you. So we've got a few more questions coming through the chat now, and I'm conscious of time. We've probably got just shy of 10 minutes to go through these, so we might try and be punchy. Andrew Hewitt has asked, to what degree are the SDGs seen or used as a reference point? Could you see evidence that people were linking their policy to the SDGs?
I think generally the Labor Party, yes, as a general philosophy, the inclusiveness. But I also noticed with the Greens, I thought, wow, that policy just sounds like that target. So I think the Greens may have been informed by the thinking of the SDGs and the targets there, or someone who knew about the targets that started to assist developing that policy.
Okay, thank you. Heather Douglas asked, there's a huge job to evaluate the different policies of the major parties. Just wondering if you are planning to explore the political realities of implementing those policies.
Yeah, hi Heather. I think that would be good. I think that I'd have to have a different methodology for that, and I have to give that further thought. I mean, we could have that in a discussion based on our analysis. We could discuss in terms of implications, but maybe I'll have to talk to you afterwards about that.
That sounds good. So is there any evidence that any of the parties have explicitly considered global goals as a framework?
Well, I should say also that Julie Bishop launched Australia's voluntary national review report on the SDGs down in Sydney, and I was there when she did that. And you know, it did showcase a lot of the good things that we were doing to achieve some of those goals. So, and you know, and when I walked through Canberra, I walked past the DFAT building, and you know, on the outside of the DFAT building, it's got the SDGs. So there is acknowledgement in government that SDGs are important. I think that question also speaks to the point that SDGs generally in the population, if anyone knows about them, they think that is just for developing countries, and our ranking of 35 shows that it's not.
That's so true. So there's a question of clarification from Chandran. Does Liberals in your chart mean the coalition or just the Liberal Party?
It means the Liberal Party policy platform that's on the website when you Google Liberals. And last time I included the Nationals in it. I will double check to see if there's anything that I've missed in terms of the Nationals this time round, but I have a feeling that despite the public differences, they're pretty well working hand in hand. There may be some sustainable agriculture ones that I may have missed, so that's a good question to follow up. Thank you.
Reflecting on 2019, did the national policy framework reduce the positive impacts or increase the positive impacts of the Liberal Party?
It doesn't stand out in my memory as something significant at all. No. The initiatives that are usually proposed by the Liberals and the Nationals are about initiatives and in terms of you know, a hub for fibre distribution, or a hub for increasing trade, or a trade for increasing production. But having said that, you know, there are a number of policies in terms of, not policies, they're initiatives, I should say, from the Liberal Party this time round, not the Nationals, but the Liberal, about green resources that hit the green resource policy area. We're talking about resources for batteries and renewable wind turbines. And those policies, they tend to direct money to hubs or initiatives or even companies to be able to facilitate that. And I think that's a little bit of a difference that I noticed in the types of approaches to the public policy problems that Australia is encountering.
Thank you. And perhaps just a final question to wrap up with. Trust in institutions is such a significant issue in this election, and also in support of achieving the 2030 agenda. I wonder what insight you had from reading the policy detail into the level of commitment that each of the parties has to the United Nations and its programs.
Just bring you back up there. Yes, in relation to the United Nations programs, you're saying that is that a question about the alignment to the United Nations programs?
I think I'm looking for over and above the 2030 agenda, what are each of the parties pitching in terms of their relationship with the UN and the role that Australia has as a member?
If you want to rank in terms of the election policies, this is not to say they might have mentioned it as a priority and that they think it's important, and which they all do in certain ways and certain things on their election policy platform. But in terms of what they want to do in terms of policy, I could say that you'd go in terms of ranking, it would be Greens, Labor, then Liberals in terms of the number of times that they mention the United Nations or human rights declarations or some convention that the United Nations administers. Yeah, so I think that that's fair to say. That's not to say that there may be other things that the government actually of the day that's actually doing. This is one of the weaknesses of this analysis, is that we can all be critical of the government's record, but there's a lot in the government record that they're actually doing in relation to convention, human rights conventions, etc. And I'm thinking that someone may be thinking about migration policies, for example, and migration policies are part of the SDGs in terms of the targets. So that was also a consideration in the SDGs I think it's number 16 where that comes in. So yes, I think that's fair to say that it goes Greens, Labor, then Liberals in terms of their alignment with the SDGs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that information with us. We'll be sharing the slides that Rob has shared with us today on our website under the Sustainable Development tab, and through our socials. We'll also post the recording on our website and on LinkedIn so that you can follow up the detail there. And as soon as Rob's report is out, we'll be promoting that through our socials as well. So I'd like to hand over to Mario Delia, who's our National President, to give us a wrap up and to thank Rob for his work and his partnering with us to present the work to you this evening.
Thank you, Susan, and you can see the camera's sort of working now, so apologies if there's a bit of light in my face, but look, thank you, Rob. That was fantastic. It's an incredible piece of work which really starts us to think about the conversations we need to have and how we explore further what needs to be done. We're all passionate in this space, and that's why we're all on tonight to try to learn. And I think what you've given us is the tools of what to look for, where to look for things, but really for us to think about as we talk to incoming ministers and backbenchers and other people elected is, are these policies enough to achieve the outcomes that are needed in terms of the SDGs, and how quickly can they be? And the conversation then is, are there better ways? Are there things that should be done differently? And that's really for us to sort of think through and talk to our representatives and have that conversation, because it takes a long while, and there's a lot of work there, and attention span of some might not be as high as others, but it's really up to us as a community to fight for that. And I'd just like to thank for all the people who've organised tonight, and for Rob especially for the amount of work that he's put into this. This has been fantastic, and thank you wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thanks. If I could just jump in there, just to say that in the report, I've tried to pick out examples of the policies that relate to the SDGs. So you can quickly go through a table for the Greens, for example, and you say, oh, this one relates to that. And then you quickly can Google that policy, and you'd find it pretty easily on Google. So I think that's a useful tool to be able to help people if they want to talk about, you know, a change in policy and how it relates to a political party. The other thing too, Mario, is that I think the narrative around inclusive growth and the benefits of inclusive growth, which are just astounding if we think back to what's happened during the pandemic. I think that's a big narrative that we can take forward and challenge some of the policies, irrespective of whatever party, because I think the Greens could actually pick up their game too in terms of inclusive economic growth. So yeah, very good point about how this may be used. Thanks.
Susan, you want to sort of talk maybe about the next steps now, what we're putting up, and where people can access information?
Thank you, Mario. So we have a set of resources sitting on our website at Work With Us under the Sustainable Development Goals page. That has our policy. It has a toolkit to help you have conversations with your local candidates. It also has our webinar that we ran on the 30th of April, supporting the toolkit and how to talk with candidates, including an excellent piece from Rob Welford about how to do that with impact. We'll be posting up the work that Rob Hales has shared with us this evening, and we'll be continuing to promote the Sustainable Development Goals through our socials right up to Election Day, which is very close now on Saturday. In terms of what we do next, as Mario said, we'll be moving to communicate with the new members and senators as they're arriving in Canberra, to let them know about the association and to invite them to join the Parliamentary Friends of the UN. And we'll be planning to continue this conversation with the Parliamentary Friends of the UN and with specific members and ministers as they respond to our communication. All of this work is stronger for the involvement that you have, so please keep carrying on doing the work that you do, and drop us a line at admin@unaa.org.au to keep us in touch with who you're communicating with and what the results are.